Hello, my name is Lisa Rutledge. I'm a registered dietitian, a food behavior expert, and a health coach. And today I wanted to talk about specific exercises for practicing mindful eating. Mindful eating can be quite not a very tangible concept for a lot of people who haven't really practiced it a lot. So I really feel like having some specific exercises to practice, some mental exercises to practice, can be very helpful in making it more of a tangible experience. So just to recap, what is mindful eating all about? Well, mindful eating, some of the philosophies include eating food that is both satisfying your mind, your body, and nourishing your body. So it's not just about eat what you love and eat when you feel like eating, although those are part of it. It also includes understanding what makes your body feel good, what makes eating to make your mind feel good, having energy, and really truly understanding how our eating affects our mood and our well-being and how we physically feel. Mindful eating includes being aware of hunger and satiety cues, so hunger and fullness cues that comes from our body's own wisdom. And they help us to guide our decisions on when to begin and end eating, and to help us choose the amounts that we need in that moment. So using our hunger and our fullness cues to help determine what and how much to eat is very empowering. Mindfulness means paying attention on purpose, or being aware of what we're doing, of what we're thinking, of what we're feeling while we're eating or while we're living. But also it includes letting go of judgments, and judgments, that means judgments about our bodies, judgments on the foods, meaning, labeling foods as good and bad, or judging ourselves for not doing enough. It also includes noticing what our thoughts that we often have, our attitudes and our moods that stimulate us to turn to food when we're not really hungry. So this idea of exploring, why am I eating when I'm not hungry? Now, if this happens once in a while, I'm eating emotionally once in a while, I eat when I'm not hungry, that's not a big deal. It's more when it happens on a regular basis that people become disturbed by it and they feel uncomfortable with it. I love this little quote here that says mindful eating is eating with intention while paying attention. So intentionally eating something, choosing something that tastes good, that nourishes your body, that makes you feel good, and paying attention while you're eating it is so important to getting that satisfaction we deserve from our food. So some of the theory we want to put into practice when it comes to these exercises is getting down to the nitty-gritty of understanding our physical signs, our physical cues of hunger and fullness. What do they physically feel like? Practicing estimating our level of hunger, taking time to check into our hunger signals before we eat, and also taking time to check into our emotions and thoughts before we eat. Checking in with things like flavor intensity and our levels of satisfaction while we're eating and even after the meal. And of course, understanding our triggers for wanting to eat when we're not hungry are so important with mindful eating. So let's just jump right into it. In order to understand how we physically feel when we're hungry or when we're full or when we have a craving or an appetite for something, the best thing to do is literally write down a list of things. How do you personally feel when you're hungry? Now, in general, physical hunger is more felt in the stomach. It's usually an empty feeling. Our stomach is growling. It gradually grows as the time passes since you last ate, so it doesn't usually go away. And it usually leads to things like low energy and headaches and feeling moody, or what we call these days hangry. Whereas if we're eating for other reasons, to quell emotions or to deal with certain thoughts or triggers, emotional hunger generally comes on very quickly, very rapidly, and it's often usually after a very specific emotion or quite immediately after a particular emotion. And usually when we have a craving or an appetite or emotionally are hungry for something, it's usually for a very specific food, and that food is usually some sort of comfort food. And emotional hunger can happen right after we eat. Of course, the idea is that we are not actually hungry in this moment. That's why it's called emotional hunger versus physical hunger. And it can occur at any time, right after a meal, whether the meal was satisfying and healthy and filling or not. And it may feel, while you're eating or satisfying this emotional hunger, it may feel that food isn't actually satiating you. You're not feeling full. You feel you can't get enough, that you're not maybe feeling comfort like you expected. And if that happens while you eat, that might be one of the signs to say, maybe I'm eating not due to hunger, but due to another issue. So hunger, as we see here, is more of a physical thing that happens with our body. It's not a craving or a thought or temptation. Not that cravings are bad or temptations are bad, but it's more of a physical thing. And that's why it's really important to eat when we are hungry, to really make sure our body has confidence in us being able to eat when it truly needs energy. So a lot of people have to relearn the signals that our body tells us because we've come to ignore them. It's inconvenient to be hungry when we have lots of work to do, or maybe we're scared to be hungry because we've been told, hunger is a good thing for weight loss. We've forgotten how to recognize it because instead of eating for hunger, we've for so many years have eaten due to time or due to convenience. Some see hunger as an enemy, something to be ignored. And some people can confuse hunger with other feelings, like feeling sad, feeling anxious, and some people will eat when they're not hungry because they're bored or because it's the proper time to eat. And that can really make it difficult to interpret those signals if we don't use them to determine when to eat. The reason we talk about hunger and the reason it's so important when it comes to mindful eating and healthy eating is because hunger is our instinctive guide for eating. It tells us, it's our body's wisdom telling us it's time for energy. It's time to top up on those on your batteries. And reconnecting is so important because it helps us to manage our eating effortlessly. When we eat according to our hunger signals and we understand our triggers, our emotions for eating when not hungry, eating becomes a lot more natural and effortless. And I love this quote here from one of the Center for Mindful Eating board members who says, mindful eating includes tuning in not only to the body's hunger and satiety, but also to its response to food. And that really kind of attests to, how do you feel after? How do you physically and emotionally feel after you eat? So not just about hunger and satiety, it's about our mental state as well. So, like I said before, creating an actual list of our hunger signs and signals and keeping it close by can be really useful. And if you're not sure if you're hungry or not, you can refer to your list, add things and take things away as you see fit. Some people spend a full day just listening to their body and recognizing their hunger and fullness cues. Some people start by, when they wake up in the morning, they try to figure out maybe their level of their hunger or how they're feeling in the morning when they're hungry versus how they feel in the afternoon when they're hungry versus how they feel right before lunch. And some very common ways of feeling is feeling an emptiness in your stomach, of course, stomach gurgling or rumbling or growling, not being able to concentrate, feeling grumpy, obviously feeling dizzy or lightheaded, and having a headache are pretty signs that it's quite you're pretty hungry. It's time to eat relatively soon. Some people feel irritable. So having literally a list can be very helpful. And then once we know what hunger and fullness really feels like, we can start asking ourselves more often, am I hungry before we eat? It could be before a meal, it could be before a snack, it could be at a particular time in the day when you feel more vulnerable to emotional eating or mindless eating. Use that hunger list, keep it with you. And if you're not hungry, if you do ask yourself, am I hungry? And the answer is no, don't worry, we have lots of options we can play with that does not include going hungry. So how can we do this? Well, we can ask ourselves, am I hungry? We can also go kind of one step beyond that and use a hunger and fullness scale to determine how hungry we are. Because hungry is not just a yes or no, on or off. It's usually an intensity. And we can be more hungry or less hungry, and that should help shape or determine how much we're going to eat. Some people use a hunger and fullness scale that looks like the one I have here, and that's a scale kind of 1 to 10, whereas 1 is ravenous and 10, you're so full you're sick. When we start eating, when we're extremely hungry, it can be very difficult to eat the amount of food that we need in that moment. It's very easy to kind of eat more than we need. I'm not thinking in terms of, oh no, you're eating too many calories, but when we eat too much, we tend to leave the meal feeling quite full and uncomfortable. So if we do start eating at a 1 on a regular basis, stepping back and asking myself, why am I so ravenous? Why am I so hungry before starting a meal? Maybe I should add a snack a few hours before, or maybe my last meal just wasn't balanced or didn't have the right amount of food. So if it happens often that you're eating and you start eating when you're ravenous, that might be one of the reasons you feel overfull at the end of the meal, because we tend to eat very quickly for good reason, because we're starving. Most people feel comfortable when they start eating a meal on a scale of about 2 to 3. Waiting longer than that can lead to feeling starving. Some people find that around a 4, it's more for a snack that they're craving or that they need. And the idea is that, not to use the scale as a rule, but to use it to how you see fit. So some people like to stop eating when they're around a 5 or a 6, but what that means you can change. So some people feel they call number 5 maybe neutral, neither hungry nor full. Some people like to use the word satisfied. Some people want to feel full but not overstuffed. So some people will say number 7 is stuffed and number 6 is full. If you are wanting to eat when you're a 5 or a 6 or a 7, chances are it's not hunger. Chances are there's another trigger, another reason why you have an urge to eat, whether that to cope with emotion, or to cope with something that's difficult perhaps coming up or that just happened. Which brings me to my next point. Thoughts and emotions can trigger a desire to eat when we're not hungry, and it's a normal thing. The idea is not to never eat when we're not hungry, but to understand how often am I eating when I'm not hungry, and what are some of the reasons, what are some of the triggers that I feel contribute to eating when I'm not hungry. Some of the reasons why we eat when we're not hungry is because we label foods as good and bad. Meaning this food is good, it will make me healthy, it'll make me lose weight. This food is bad. It's, I don't know, too high in this, too high in that, or it will make me fat. That tends to push us to want to eat the foods we label bad. The more we label them as good and bad, the more we want what we can't have. Thoughts of, what the heck, I've already ruined it. I already had too many carbs at lunch, I've already ruined it. Why stop there? Might as well just finish the bag, or might as well do whatever I want for supper and start again tomorrow because I've already ruined it. That can really trigger us to eat more than what we need and more than what we actually want to eat in that meal. Feeling fat, feeling I don't deserve this, this is not for me, only other people can eat this food. That can really increase a lot of negative emotions and push us to cope with those emotions. And of course, feeling anxious or sad or bored or having a low mood are all reasons why we sometimes eat when we're not hungry. And food can help us cope with intense and negative emotions. My question I like to ask my clients is does it help every time? Are you taking time to reflect after the meal or after a snack? Do I feel better now? Did that help? Does that food help me when I'm feeling like this? And sometimes the answer will be yes, and sometimes we might surprise ourselves and say, actually, I don't feel better. After 3 or 4 or 5 cookies, I'm not feeling any better. I could continue eating and see if it continues to help, but chances are, if I've eaten a little bit already and it hasn't helped and I'm not hungry, there might be another solution that may not be as easy as eating, but that will really help me feel better in the long run, and in the short run, much more than food. So what happens is when we eat when we're not hungry, is often what tends to happen is we reach for food when we're feeling stressed, maybe bored, lonely, mad, sad, anxious about tomorrow, angry about today, and we reach for food instead of paying attention to what we're feeling and the underlying need. What do I actually need in this moment? What is the actual problem? If the actual problem is not hunger, then food is probably not going to solve that particular problem every time. So then we eat instead of dealing with the emotion or the thought, and those needs go unmet. And those needs will not be solved. Those problems of anxiety or tension will not be solved, which continues to drive us to eat emotionally. So it's kind of a big vicious circle sometimes. And I really love this quote from Michelle May, Dr. Michelle May from amihungry.com, who says, "Don't settle for food when what you really need is rest, appreciation, conversation, or fun." And I love this quote because it deals with settling for food. Instead of saying, don't eat, you're not hungry, you don't deserve to eat, you shouldn't eat, the calories are bad, but saying, but eating is not a bad thing to do. It just won't solve the problem. And what your body may really need is something that is going to be more suited to the actual problem. So instead of vilifying food, it's really about settling for it when that's not really what we need. Maybe not allowing ourselves the time to take care of ourselves as we need, because food can be relatively easy to get and easy to eat, whereas taking time out of our day to relax, go for a walk, read a book, do some self-care can be a little more difficult. One way to check into our emotions and thoughts before eating is sometimes I have clients who will write down in a journal how they're feeling. I had one client in particular who decided to use emojis, which I thought that was an awesome trick. She found that she wanted to check in with her emotions before lunchtime because her days at work were pretty emotionally charged in the morning. It was go, go, go all morning. And she found that when she sat down to lunch, she was always leaving lunch overstuffed and full. And she wasn't quite sure why. So she decided to choose an emoji, right before lunch, take a minute before sitting down in front of her food. And she took out her phone, and in a little notepad on her phone, she would record the date as well as pick an emoji that would represent her emotions. And she found quickly, after a few days, that she was really tense and full of frustration right before lunchtime. And it was something that was quite surprising to her because she loves her job and she's good at her job, and she's something she enjoys, but she didn't realize just how emotionally charged she was going into lunch. And by just taking a minute to reflect, how am I feeling in this moment? Are there any thoughts going through my head? That really, really helped her to just acknowledging the problem helped her calm down. Just seeing what was happening and listening to her brain and her mind, it allowed her to kind of take a deep breath and reset before lunch. Not even actually doing anything about the emotion, just being mindful that it was there and that it might affect her eating. So how do we notice our hunger levels? If you're kind of a step-by-step person like I am, and you'd like kind of a step-by-step guide on how to do that, let me give you a little bit of ways of how it's worked for other people. So we want to take a moment to check into our hunger signals, our emotional signals, our triggers, our thoughts before we eat. So ideally we would do this not in the presence of food. So we'd either move away from the food or before we get into the environment where the food is. So before we walk into the restaurant, maybe before we sit down with our lunch bag, before we walk into the house at the end of the long day. And we want to connect with our body and our physical feelings, or how we physically feel. We could place a hand on our abdomen. We can picture our stomach and say, how full is my stomach? How empty? If I imagine my stomach like a balloon, how much, air, how much food do I need to fill it to make it feel full? Of course, asking ourselves, am I hungry? And then if we're not sure, saying, well, what are the physical sensations I have right now of hunger or fullness? And using maybe a hunger scale of how hungry am I? So how much do I think I might need? Based on my hunger, not based on a meal plan or based on a weight loss plan. Ideally, we want to observe if there's any other physical signs or sensations. Am I feeling edgy, weak, tired, thirsty? Are those really kind of making it hard to determine how much I need to eat? And then noticing our thoughts as well. Are you rationalizing eating? Are you feeling guilty, shameful, stressed? Are you thinking about other things other than food? Is maybe lunch just something to get through before you go back to work? Do you feel you deserve to eat? And things like that are very important to notice. So why do some people mindlessly eat or emotionally eat? Well, some of the causes are not being aware of why or what we're eating. So kind of sitting in front of the TV, grabbing something and not really asking ourselves, am I hungry? Not really noticing what we're eating. So ideally we want to remain mindful of what, when, and why we're eating, and just asking ourselves those questions, saying, before I eat anything, I'm just going to ask myself, am I hungry? And no matter what the answer is, I can eat if I want to. Sometimes we emotionally eat because we're letting ourselves get too hungry or too tired. And then we feel very vulnerable to emotional eating, because sometimes emotional eating can perk us up, give us a jolt of calories. It can change the mood. It can change the environment. So understanding, being able to tap into, why do I want to eat right now? Understanding and learning my hunger signals, checking in with my body, learning to interpret my hunger levels. Of course, taking time for self-care, so resting when I'm fatigued, taking time to have snacks if I'm getting to be too hungry, and even just understanding, this is my vulnerable moment. This is my vulnerable hour of the day. This is the time that I usually feel not hungry, but are enticed to eat. And just even acknowledging that right now is a difficult moment. I can still eat if I really, really want to. But in the past, it hasn't helped me get through this tough moment. Even a simple reflection like that can help us feel more in charge of our eating. A big cause that I've found has been very big in the last few months, and maybe because I've been honing in on it more and more with clients, is hating our body, feeling negative towards it, shameful towards our body, or hating our body can really push us to eat mindlessly and eat emotionally. And feeling negative or shame or hatred towards our body has never inspired long-lasting great changes from anybody. You cannot hate yourself healthy. And hating our body is one of the biggest factors in emotional eating. And I know it's an easy thing to say, and I know that there's many different ways to improve our body positivity or become more neutral with our body rather than hating it. Of course, ideally, loving our body would be the ultimate best place to go, but I understand that that can seem a little out of reach for some people. So finding maybe more of a neutral way of thinking about our body can really do wonders in reducing emotional eating. So working on body acceptance can be extremely helpful, albeit not the easiest thing, but it is possible. So avoiding feeling bad by distracting ourselves from difficult feelings can cause emotional eating. So our inability to tolerate, or being unable to tolerate, the yucky feelings of life that are inevitable can make us susceptible to emotional eating. So if we eat to numb our feelings or to distract ourselves from something shitty that happened, something that made us feel yucky and not very good, there's always going to be yucky things that make us not feel very good in life. And if we practice letting ourselves experience these difficult, yucky feelings without coping or leaning on food to help us cope, we tend to eat far less emotionally. Not emotionally as creatures, because as creatures we're emotional beings, but we tend to eat far less in an emotional manner, or let emotions dictate what we eat. If food is your only source of pleasure or joy or self-care, oh boy, does that lead to emotional eating or what? Let me say, when I talk to clients who tell me, they get up at 4:30 and they run around and they go to work and they come home and they help with homework and they make the dinner and they clean up the kitchen and the house, and they have about 5 minutes to themselves all day, and at the end of the day, they just want to relax and kick off their shoes and just let themselves have a moment. That's often when people tend to reach for food, because there's been no other moment of peace or relaxation or joy in the day. And when food is our only source of pleasure, and especially if it's at the end of the day when we're feeling tired and drained of energy, my goodness, I find that's one of the biggest factors of at least my clients when it comes to emotional eating. So it's really important, instead of saying, don't snack at night or avoid certain foods, is to find other ways to reward and soothe ourselves besides food. That could be in the moment. If I use the example of, usually it's evening eating after supper with my clients, but it can also happen, throughout the day when we're most vulnerable to eat, to soothe ourselves, to give ourselves a little bit of me time. And if we can find other ways to give ourselves me time, that can be helpful. But also finding moments during the day and not allowing me time to be only at night, to allowing moments, a couple minutes of me time, hopefully a few times a day, can help us get to the end of the day less drained and more energized, and less likely to say, darn it, I worked so hard, I deserve to just sit back for the next few hours and just do what I want. There's nothing wrong with doing what we want and kicking off our shoes and relaxing. But if that's the only moment of relaxing, going on a diet or restricting food at that vulnerable moment is not going to work. Dealing with the actual problem, which is not allowing yourself any minutes in the day to relax or to take a deep breath, that's usually the better solution. So some people really like to record what they eat or how they feel. And for some of my clients, it's very beneficial for them to be able to see patterns with their hunger, with their emotions, and with their thoughts by writing them down. So this is kind of a version of a food diary, but with no emphasis on portions or calories, or really the only reason the food is there is to be able to determine, how full did it make me feel, and maybe to help me see a pattern in my choices, not to judge our foods, but really to see patterns. So I have 3 different examples here. I have one where you're just talking about, maybe the time that you ate, how hungry you were before eating, and what did you eat and where were you? And then some people like to be a little more specific with their hunger levels before as well as fullness levels after the meal. And some people want to include things like thoughts and emotions. So for this last example here, it was 9 o'clock at night. This person was a hunger level of 4, which means, kind of maybe up for a snack. They ate a pear. After they ate a pear and chips and chocolate, they felt the hunger level of 6. They were sitting on the couch and they wrote down that they were anxious about tomorrow. They at first chose a pear because it was the healthy choice, but didn't feel satisfied afterwards. Then ate some chips and they felt guilty and they thought, what the heck, I ruined it. So they ate what they really were craving for, which was chocolate. And that can show us a pattern that perhaps if that person just went for a piece of chocolate to begin with, they would have satisfied that craving more. Or maybe next time they'll try a pear again. It kind of depends on your experience with it. The idea is that if we go for a healthy choice instead of a choice that we really, really want instead, chances are we'll end up eating what we wanted anyways and feeling over full because we've eaten what we thought we should as well as eaten what we wanted. So mindful eating diaries can be very interesting. Some people call them food diaries. Depends on what type of information's in them. Now, checking in with flavor intensity and satisfactional eating can be something we often overlook. Often we're focused on hunger levels and fullness levels and emotional triggers and thought triggers. But when we check in with flavor intensity over the span of a meal and how satisfied we feel during a meal or after a meal, I find those are the most powerful sensations that help people feel like they've chosen the right thing or the right amount, or perhaps should try better next time and try a different strategy next time. And that's because we talk about flavor intensity because the body, as you know, sends us many, many signals of when we may have eaten enough. So our stomach starts to expand, we have hormones sending signals to the brain, we have physical sensations, but often the quickest feedback is from our taste buds. And the taste buds get habituated rather quickly while we're eating something, meaning the flavor intensity will decrease over the span of a meal. If we're more hungry, this happens more slowly. So when we're more hungry, the flavor intensity remains pretty intense longer because our body needs more fuel and our body wants us to eat more fuel and therefore allows us to taste with more intensity. When the taste buds get tired, if we're paying attention, the food tastes different and less good, less intense, less pleasurable than it did at the beginning of the meal. And so if we listen to our taste buds, we naturally start to slow down. We naturally start to feel less desire to eat. And some people, when we're not paying attention to that flavor intensity change, some people will continue to eat even though they're full because we're chasing the flavor, or we're looking for that flavor blast that we had at the very beginning of the meal. And we feel like perhaps by eating more and more, we'll find that again. But in fact, we don't. So the flavor intensity of the food at the beginning of the meal does not usually come back. And understanding, okay, the food does not taste as good. Am I chasing the flavor? Am I feeling full? That might be your cue to kind of put the fork down and just internally do a body scan and ask myself, am I really hungry for what's left on my plate? Or how hungry am I and how much food do I think I need? The more complex a food is, they tend to have more pleasure factor for longer because more taste buds are involved. So, if you're eating just one dish wonder, that only has like a monotone flavor throughout versus maybe different textures and different flavors throughout the meal, you might find that pleasure and flavor intensity lasts longer the more complex the dish. And here's another quote I love from amihungry.com. It's actually an Irish proverb, but it says that seldom is the last of anything better than the first. And I love that because we do eat for pleasure, and it is normal to chase that pleasure or chase the flavor. But understanding that that's what's happening can be very mindful. Whether you continue to eat or not, it's still mindful. The idea about mindfulness is that you know what is going on. You know that you're chasing the flavor. So by truly paying attention, certain foods we thought were the best or were the greatest, we might find out that some of our favorite foods may not taste as good as we thought, because instead of putting the emphasis on this is a bad food, I should avoid it, I should feel guilty, this is my only chance, this is my cheat day. Instead of putting that as an influence on the intensity and on the flavor, we're being a little more objective about the flavor. And sometimes some of our favorite foods can seem maybe too salty or too greasy or too sweet or maybe boring when we feel less guilty when we eat them or when we truly pay attention to their flavor. I had a client who said to me that she was addicted to birthday cake. She felt addicted to birthday cake. She felt like, if anybody brought a birthday cake to the office, she just couldn't stop thinking about it. She was preoccupied about how big her slice was and was always thinking about going back for more. And when I asked her, I said, well, what do you mean about, what's a birthday cake? Like, to me, a birthday cake could mean any sort of cake. And she said, yeah, any sort of cake. As long as someone brought it to the office for a birthday, that was birthday cake. And I love them all. I do love them all. I thought that was very interesting because not all cakes are made the same. And I find it unlikely that someone would love everything of a certain kind of food. So I see, chocolate, caramel, custards with fruit, like anyone in particular? She goes, no, all of them. So that really led our conversation down the path of, well, I wonder if they all truly taste the same. I wonder if they all are truly delicious. Similar to French fries. If you've ever eaten French fries from McDonald's and compared them to those from maybe Costco or Burger King or Dairy Queen or Wendy's, you'll notice they're all different. And it's likely that they don't all taste equally as good to you. If you find that a particular food tastes equally as delicious and savory and tempting and guilt-ridden, it's probably not because they actually all taste good. It's probably more based on the fact that maybe you're eating those foods very fast, feeling very guilty about eating those foods, and that's fueling your desire for them rather than the actual taste. So being scared to eat our favorite foods or by feeling our favorite foods should be riddled with guilt often leads us to overeat them. So it's when we really begin to truly appreciate the flavors of foods, it can make us more particular about what we eat. So paying attention to the flavors and the tastes and our hunger levels very often do not lead us to overeat them. They very often allow us to naturally or effortlessly eat the right amount for us in that moment. And I find that in this buffets are this great example, because often a lot of people will see buffets as something to be feared, as something that's scary. You know, watch out, those buffets, you're going to eat too much and be regretful and pack on the pounds and have the wrong types of foods. But I find that as people who are more intuitive eaters or attuned or mindful eaters, buffets are a really interesting setting because it allows us to eat exactly what we want. We don't have to make one food choice and stick to that plate. It allows us to experiment with different flavors. And we can not finish a food we don't like and go back for other foods that we did enjoy more of. So that's something I often encourage my clients to practice with, is facing their fears of certain foods by either eating the food or being put in a situation like at a buffet, and learning to taste food with less fear and learning some really positive lessons from that. So instead of saying I always overeat at buffets, let's start a new dialogue. Let's start eating in a way that's a little bit different, that allows you to feel more comfortable when you go to buffets. Because the more you learn, hey, I didn't overeat. Hey, I really stuck to the foods I loved. And when I was full and the flavor started to go away, you know what? I kind of naturally stopped eating because I knew that I could come back if I wanted. I knew I could go back to the buffet if I wanted, but my stomach was kind of hurting. So I thought, you know, maybe I won't feel better by eating more of a particular food. And buffets allow us to really discover what truly tastes good instead of committing to one particular dish at other restaurants. Something to consider. So if you are to go, for example, to a buffet or to a party where there's a table full of food, here's what I suggest could be some steps that you do that in a way that'd be more mindful and help you feel more in charge. So before going up to the food, think about the types of food that appeal to you right now. Not what in foods in general do you love, but what are you in the mood of eating right now? And before choosing what you want to eat, look at the choices that are on the table and decide what appeals to you most. Consider how hungry you are and how that affects your food choices. If you're very hungry, chances are you're going to want to pile on more food on that plate because you're more hungry. Moderate hunger, being moderately hungry, so hungry for enough for a meal, sharpens our senses and makes us more particular about what we want to eat. Whereas when we're starving, we often feel like, well, just get me something, I don't care what it is. And when we're not very hungry, nothing usually appeals to us. So we want to pick up our plate and take a small or a medium or a reasonable portion that you determine is reasonable of everything you'd like to try. And then the idea is that we sit down, we begin to eat it slowly, and we tune into the tastes and the smells and the textures of each bite. Is it actually good? Does it taste as good as it looks? Do you like it? Did you thought you'd like it? Does it too salty, too sweet? If you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. You don't have to eat it just because it's on your plate. Eating to satisfy others or to finish it on our plate is not very mindful because it doesn't respect what our body is telling us. The idea is that we continue to taste our food that we've put on our plate, savoring what you enjoy, stopping when the satisfaction from the taste starts to drop, or continuing if you choose to. And when you're finished with what you've selected, consider whether you're satisfied in your mind and in your body and how full you feel, and decide if you need more. Rather than saying, oh no, I took too much. When we start to feel guilty over our food choices, it really muddies the water. It makes it very difficult to decide, do I really, really want more? Is there more room left in my stomach to put more food? Versus, well, it's my only time here. It's my cheat day. I might as well just go for it. And if you're not hungry and you're over full already, food I don't think is going to add to that satisfaction of that day. So it's really also very important as mindful eaters to understand what are the triggers for us to want to eat when we're not hungry. And sometimes our triggers can be physical, so being fatigued, feeling very tired, not getting enough sleep, lacking energy, whether that be physical energy or mental rest as well. And if we're not actually hungry, energy levels will very unlikely be boosted through food. They can be environmental triggers, so habits of eating in certain situations with certain people at certain times can trigger a sense of false hunger We can ask ourselves, am I hungry before eating? And it's okay to eat a little bit and then realize, you know what, actually, I'm not that hungry. Actually, it's not tasting very good. Actually, it's not what I wanted. It's okay to stop and decide that I don't want to continue eating anymore. Just because the food's in front of you, it does not mean you have to finish it. It's your choice. An urge to eat or having an urge to eat or having cravings obviously does not necessarily mean we're hungry. It can mean a suggestion. It's a suggestion to eat. But if you're feeling really beholden to your cravings, to your urges, it's really important to talk to your registered dietitian with experience on that, because sometimes with time and with lots of past dieting or lots of body shame, our cravings can be less of suggestions to eat and more demands of eating. And cravings are a very normal part of life, and feeling like you have a choice. I can eat or I cannot eat. Those are my choices. And sometimes I'm going to eat, and that's going to be great. And sometimes I'm going to not eat, and that's going to be great. And sometimes I'm going to not eat my craving. It's not going to be great. And just learning from your experiences of on the days when your cravings feel less intense, what's different about that day? Were you feeling any different? Were you thinking any differently? Were you wearing clothes that maybe fit you better? Or did you have an encounter that stressed you out that day? It's okay to eat our cravings sometimes, but if you feel beholden to them, that they're an absolute must, that makes people feel very uncomfortable and very unhappy. Tension, I find, so nervousness or anxiety or tension can be mistaken for hunger, and eating can sometimes physically, when we're crunching and we're moving our jaw, that can sometimes relieve some of that tension. However, there's often better, more effective ways to do that, to reduce those feelings. And of course, as we mentioned before, there's lots of emotional triggers as well to eating. So feeling sad or angry or lonely or frustrated can trigger a desire to eat. And eating can temporarily soothe and distract us. It often doesn't do that for very long. So finding solutions that help us more in the long run to help reduce these emotions are often more effective. So we're talking about, wanting to eat when we're not hungry. What can we actually do? The idea is to ask ourselves, am I hungry? And if I'm not hungry, there is no rule saying I can't eat anyways. Knowing that eating is a possibility, is an option, tends to reduce our anxiety about it. So if I'm feeling not hungry and I want to eat, the minute I tell myself, no, you're not supposed to, that's the minute I want it even more. And that's the minute my tension and my anxiety rises. So if you've determined you're not hungry and you want to eat, you certainly have options. One, you can eat anyways. And if you do decide to eat anyways, you can halfway through that snack or after a couple cookies ask yourself, do I feel better? Am I feeling satisfied and satiated? Is this making me feel more happy or less tense? And if it's not, I could continue eating, or maybe I could find something else to do that'd be more effective. And this takes practice. It's almost like a learned thing. Do it a few times, checking in, how do I feel? And going, wow, I'm seeing a pattern that I'm not feeling better after I eat when I'm feeling this way. I wrote a blog post after kind of sitting down after a long day in the summer, and I had a glass of wine. I just expected to feel this release of tension from my shoulders after a long day. And after that glass of wine, I didn't feel any less tense. And I thought, boy, sometimes we expect to have pleasure through food or drink, and maybe that's not what I needed in that moment. Sometimes a glass of wine or some food will help, and sometimes it's really other things that need to help us with our tension or anxiety. So we could eat anyways when we're not hungry. We could distract ourselves by having maybe a list of fun activities that are incompatible with eating, and I underline fun activities. Maybe folding laundry is fun for you, or cleaning your bathroom, but if it is not, then I suggest having a list of things to do that are fun, give you some pleasure, reduce some stress, that make eating difficult, just to distract you for a period of time to see if the craving will go away. And then your third option is to actually deal with understand the trigger, maybe what triggered you to want to eat, and deal with the actual need. If you're not hungry, food is probably not going to be the answer to the problem. So understanding, where did the urge come from? Were you watching TV? Did someone say something? Did you try to fit in a pair of jeans that haven't fit for years? What triggered it, and how can you better deal with that trigger, that current emotion, that current negative thought that makes you feel better without needing food, without having to resort to food, which probably will not help anyways. So if we put this all together, what would this look like if we were to sit down at a meal and use kind of the mindful eating philosophies through a meal? So here are a few questions that can help guide us as we're eating a meal. So of course, one of the first questions is, as I'm hungry. We want to take a moment to determine if we truly are hungry. And we have to do this by understanding how does our fullness feel? How does our hunger feel for us? So obviously it's key to make a list and keep that handy. How hungry am I? So again, we can use a hunger scale. We can use the hunger scale before eating, before stepping into the house, before entering the kitchen, before going to the pantry, even halfway through the meal. We can ask ourselves, how hungry am I now? I started at a 2, and how hungry am I now? Obviously, learning to identify our hunger cues before they get out of hand, meaning before some of the extremes. And one thing to keep in mind is that hunger is a lot easier to feel than fullness. So it's easier to cue into our hunger cues than it is to our fullness cues. So practicing our hunger and then moving on to fullness, if that works for you, tends to be a little bit easier for people. And the idea of eating to prevent being hungry later, it's not a topic we're going to get into today, but that's something that might trigger you to want to eat. And then, what shall I eat? There's 3 questions we can ask ourselves if we want to eat something. Is, what do I want? Do I feel for something sweet, something salty, something crunchy, hot, protein, carby? What do I really want to eat right now? Marrying that with the idea of, what do I need? What have I ate today? Have there been any food groups that I missed? What do I tend to eat too little of? And understanding what our body needs in a whole day can help us sometimes guide us if we really have no clue or too many options of what to eat. And then asking ourselves, thirdly, what do I have? What's available to me around the house, in my pantry, in my car? What works into my budget? And planning, so having things in the house and around that you like can be very key to satisfying both what we need and what we want to eat. Asking ourselves, how will I eat? You know, if I eat in an environment that's has more distractions, like in front of the TV versus at the table, does that change how I eat and how I experience food? Will I eat with emotionally charged with lots of emotions? And will I eat in different physical states? When I'm tired, when I'm rested, does that affect how I eat? And it certainly does for most people affect our choices, affects our hunger levels, our appetite levels, our desire to eat. And just being aware of how the environment, our emotions, and our physical states when eating can increase our satisfaction for foods or our desire for foods. Checking in to see how satisfied you feel mentally and physically after eating certain foods. Was it as delicious as expected? Are you feeling satisfied and happy? Was it a nice burst of pleasure, or was this a real letdown? That can really help us learn from those experiences of our meals. Taking time to savor the flavors and smells and textures of the food can help us enjoy them more. And noticing this change in sensitivity of our taste buds can be really important too. And then, of course, the big question of, how much food do I need? It really takes a lot of practice to learn how much of certain foods are needed to satisfy me both physically and mentally. So using your hunger level plus, when is your next meal or snack, plus your experience with a particular food. Certain foods are going to fill us up sooner, and some foods are going to take longer to fill us up. And of course, avoiding feeling guilty, ashamed, or upset. If you happen to eat beyond your satisfaction levels, that's really key, because we want to learn from the experience, not feel guilty about it. And some people find that determining how full or how they want to feel at the end of the meal, so before eating, at the beginning of the meal, determining, how do I want to feel at the end of this meal? Satisfied, full, happy, content, and what does that mean in terms of fullness? and what happened last time I ate at this restaurant, or I ate this food, or I ate with such tension and emotion. Did it make me feel better, or could there be a different way that I can eat that helps me get to the end of the meal feeling super great? So I've already gone here. All right. So some of the exercises that I suggested, that if we do a little recap, that you practice, are to create a list of your personal physical signs of hunger. Before eating, ask ourselves, am I hungry? Try rating our hunger using the hunger fullness scale. We can rate our hunger before, during, and after a meal. We can keep a mindful eating food journal to track hunger levels, to track emotions and thoughts, and the idea is that we're looking for patterns. We can focus on the intensity of the flavor of the food while eating. So it's kind of like continuing to be mindful in the moment, being present in the moment in the flavor intensity, and watch how it changes throughout the meal. And of course, understanding what thoughts and emotions trigger you to eat when not hungry. It's not necessarily about changing our emotions and our thoughts, but understanding for you what triggers you, what gets you into this negative state, what makes you feel yucky, what are some of the thoughts and the emotions that swimming around your head, and if we blame it on the wrong thing, we won't find the right solution. So we say, oh, it's because I just am so bad, I never go to the grocery store enough, I don't plan enough. But if in reality it's because there's just no time in the day to actually go do groceries. And when you do groceries, you buy so little because you're scared of keeping food in the house. Oh boy. Well, there's some maybe other things that we can tackle that'll make healthy eating and pleasurable eating a lot more easy than focusing on the wrong solution. Again, another kind of quote here from the Center for Mindful Eating is, when we don't pay attention to our food and our body as we eat, we rob ourselves of the full experience and therefore the full satisfaction of eating. And we often forget that satisfaction is not just about feeling full physically, but mentally. The flavors, the act of chewing and eating and tasting and smelling, they're so important for us feeling happy and satisfied at the end of the meal. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I really hope that there's some hands-on experiments or mental exercises that you can do to help you bring her closer to eating in a happy, healthy, peaceful, calm way. If you'd like to learn more about mindful eating, or if you'd like to be in touch, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me through my website, which is www.lisarutledge.ca.